Now we're going to be starting in 31, Mark chapter 8. This is Jesus, and he began to teach them, being the disciples, that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, but turning and seeing the disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. For you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Jesus is talking to the disciples here, and he's explaining in the first of 3 predictions of his death. Now remember, we don't have history like Jewish people have history. In fact, we disregard much of history. You don't like history class, most of you. You sleep during that class. I had 2 history classes. The first one, my freshman year, 9 a.m., I slept every single day for the entire 50 minutes. And I passed. This is senior Sunday. That was not advice to the seniors. But I passed, right? Nobody likes history, and you're weird if you do. And those of you who say, "No, I really like history," you probably don't read much history. You just like to think you like history. And so it's hard to relate to this, but you need to understand that the Jewish people had long history, and they knew their history, and they cared about their history. This is going to sound rude, and I don't mean it to be, but this is why the Jewish people here, they were known by their name, but more importantly by their father's name. So right, we meet Simon Bar Jonah, Simon the son of Jonah. And the only real analogy we have is horses or dogs, right, that we attribute to their lineage. We don't do that in our culture. And so it's hard to understand this, but you need to get that even though the disciples have been with Jesus for the past 3 years, they have this long storied history of what the Messiah is going to be. And it doesn't look like Jesus. It's a military ruler. It's the ruler that's going to come and take back what's rightfully theirs. It's someone who's going to take a position of power and might and prestige. Some of you are still waiting for this type of Messiah. Bad news. Not what Jesus came to do. But they're waiting for this big, powerful man. It's why the sons of thunder, the sons of Zebedee, come to Jesus and go, "Hey, when you get in, can we sit at your right and left hand? Because we want the power too." Because they're still looking for this military ruler that's going to overthrow the Romans. They've been in captivity of some sort or another for so long. And so for him to correctly identify Jesus as the Christ, Peter has an image of now what this looks like. His eyes have been opened. He now knows that Jesus is the Christ. And then Jesus follows this with a prediction of his death, and that doesn't line up with the thing that they've been taught for so long. And so Peter, in a way that is inappropriate in every line of thinking, rebukes his teacher, pulls Jesus aside and says, "Jesus, I think you're mistaken. You can't die because that's not the way that we've drawn it up. And that's not going to give me power. That's not going to give me prestige. That's not going to give me the things I want." Some of you are there, right? You've pulled Jesus aside and said, "Hey, Jesus, I get it, but you're mistaken because I want power and prestige and you want me to do this other thing." And Peter is rebuked back in much harsher fashion, right? You don't want Jesus to call you Satan. But this is an important distinction that I just realized only about a year ago when I preached this passage at a Disciple Now. That this phrase in the Greek where he says, "Get behind me," is the exact same phrase he uses when he calls Peter and he says, "Follow me." I had always read this, at least temporarily, as a dismissal of Peter. Get behind me, right? Get away from me, get out of my way, you're in the way right now. But he's not. He's actually calling Peter back to the correct position of a disciple. Peter finds himself doing something that none of us should ever do, and yet he's not responded to with dismissal, but with correction.